Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. The website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we do not really have sponsors for this project, but if we did, today's interview, the first of two interviews that I did with Tracy Lauritzen Wright, would be brought to you by being young, getting up into trees, falling out of trees, and the great surgeons that fixed Tracy's ACL. Now, again, this interview with Tracy Lauritzen Wright is the first of two. This one was recorded on January 9th, 2025. Enjoy the interview. So today is Thursday, the 9th of January, 2025.
2025.
And we're at the Memphis Listening Lab with Tracy Lauritzen Wright.
Yes.
And so usually the way I start this is I just say, what's your earliest memory of art from your childhood?
Oh, gosh. Well, I guess I'll go with what popped into my head. So my mom's older sister was a school teacher, and she lived in Omaha. We lived in Fremont, which is just outside of Omaha. And she had friends that worked for Union Pacific Railroad. And they always had these, like, I don't know what they were, some kind of big, they were like more than 8.5 by 11, but not quite 11 by 17 pads of paper that were like these charts where they had to document railroad stuff. And we always had those, and my sister and I would always draw on the back side of those. So like those were our drawing pads growing up, were these Union Pacific Railroad things.
Now how old is your sister in terms of your age?
Yeah, so my sister's 3 years younger than me.
Okay.
And she actually is a visual artist. She's an art teacher. She teaches in Blair, Nebraska. Yeah.
Now, what kind of things were you drawing?
Well, I would draw. Actually, my mom saved everything. So recently she returned to me a drawing that I did apparently when I was little. That was a drawing of me and my future husband, who had a mustache and a beard, and a little girl, which apparently was going to be our daughter. But then there was a cat in the drawing also, and a dog. I don't know where the dog came from, because we're cat people, we're not dog people. Right. So anyways, I would draw little people and houses and stuff like that. But we did one time, this is so funny that you asked this question, but we one time got my sister and I got all the neighbor kids together, and we decided we were going to draw a bunch of pictures, and then we were going to go and sell them in the neighborhood for money. So we drew a bunch of pictures, we put them in our little red wagon, and then we went through the neighborhood and sold drawings for, a nickel or a quarter or whatever.
Nice. Now, what about in the house? Was there art in the house aside from these fantastic drawings that you and your friends were making?
No, not really. I mean, family photos mostly. Just not really art. My mom likes antiques and stuff like that. So
now, you were saying that your sister is also connected to the arts. How was it that these two kids in Nebraska, where in Nebraska?
Fremont, Nebraska.
How was it that you two got this bug? Any family members or anybody that were makers as well?
I think we just had really great parents, who, our mom stayed home with us. It was in the 70s, and so mom stayed at home with us, and we watched Sesame Street 3 times a day, so I don't know.
Well, now what about with school? Was there was there an art component to your education?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was we always had visual art in every grade until middle school, I think, and then it became optional, and we always had music, we always had visual art. So yeah.
Now, what about in the community there? Were you close to museums? Was it a thing where you guys would go to trips to see the local museum?
I mean, occasionally it wasn't like something we usually. It's not like how Ted and I are now with Anna. Like when we travel, that's what we do. We go to the art museums. It wasn't so much like that, but we did. We maybe would go to the history museum, or so we did kind of regularly go to that, but. It wasn't necessarily an arts-driven focus, but I do remember, like when I was maybe 8 or 9, Mom took us to see the Nutcracker at the Orpheum Theater in Omaha, and so I think getting to do stuff like that at a young age was cool.
Now, what kind of things, like in terms of the school, what was the school art room like? Like, was it particularly limited? Was it diverse?
Yeah, so we in elementary school we had a traveling art teacher, which is my sister's first art teaching job. She had a cart, and so yeah, so my dad built her art cart, but we had the art teacher would bring the cart into the classroom. So same with the music teacher, they would bring the music cart into the classroom, and so that's how it was in elementary school. And
so, like, when you were doing that kind of thing, was there also a kind of like a show and tell component? Were they also showing you things, and if so, what?
Well, I mean, I think well, I would say the visual art teacher in my elementary school wasn't particularly nice. The music teacher was super nice, but she did interesting stuff. And I do remember one time, I think I was in second grade or something, and she, we had some art assignment. I can't tell you what it was, but one of the students did something kind of abstract. Everyone else did something representational, and she held up the abstract one as an example of really great work. Like, this is really great. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. It is really great. So, and then, it would all get displayed outside the classroom in the hallway. So
now, you were saying you would also make these drawings with your sister on the backs of these found sketchbooks almost. And so how did that then mature? Like, when you moved on to middle school or high school, was that also something that was sort of present there for you?
I think by that time, my strength was not necessarily in art, not visual art or music. My sister always had really good, like, drawing from, representational drawing and drawing from observation. Like, she's still really good at that, and that was not so much my thing. I kind of went more towards the academic stuff as well. And then I got interested in languages too, so that's where I ended up. But that's what led me eventually to museum work, was going through language studies.
I love that you did that thing where it was like the when I did this interview with Beth, and I always talk about this because, and I feel like it's like this thing that's going to pop up again and again in the podcast, where I talk about this thing with Beth, where I was like, okay, here's the first question, and then Beth like talked for a long time, and then Beth goes, and then that brings me up to what I'm doing today. So we're just going to pull back just a little bit, because one of the things I'm really curious about with these conversations is that a great many things impacted you and influenced you and made you who you are. Like Terry Gross always talks about how that's like her goal is to figure out what it was that happened in a particular person's life that led them to be the awesome person that they are. And so there's a bunch of things that I'm curious about in there. One was that you were talking about how your sister had this particular drive, and of course, like, there's a million things that can kind of lead us to be where we are, but also thinking about being more interested in academia and in languages. And I'm curious how that popped up for you.
Well, I guess, and you're really good at asking these questions, Hamlet, because like what's coming to my mind is like early childhood memories that so really good job. But so growing up, we spent more time with my mom's parents than my dad's parents, I think, because they were closer. But my grandparents spoke German, and not in the household, but their parents had grown up speaking German, so like my grandpa taught me some basic German, so I got really curious about learning German. So that's once had the chance to do that in middle school, I got really into it and got, really excited about it. And so that's what I eventually ended up majoring in undergraduate school.
Now, what do you think it was about language in particular, especially the German language, that clicked for you?
Well, I think, one, it was personal. It was kind of, family, like my mom growing up. Like, I still, to this day, like, if something goes wrong, I'm like, ah.
Right.
So, or I talk about schmutz, or, just because those are things that I grew up hearing and learning from my mom, who learned them from her, her parents growing up. So, but I think, also growing up in Fremont, Nebraska, I was very interested in going other places. So I think part of it was being interested in something that was from elsewhere,
Now, a lot of people will be from a small town,
Yeah.
but they will not be aware of the greater world, and a kind of desire to go and explore the greater world. What is it? What was it about either the town, Fremont, that made you hungry for more, or were there experiences where your family traveled and you began to see the larger world?
Yeah.
How did that work for you?
Gotcha. Well, I had, so one, my parents took us everywhere. We took road trips everywhere. Like, we always had a big summer vacation. And even when, maybe the financial means weren't there for a vacation, we would travel. And there's this, like, one of my favorite family vacations was when my dad was an auto body mechanic. And so every now and then, when cars would come in that were totaled, he would buy them and fix them, and then we would have them. So we had a Triumph TR7 car for a while. That was a 2-seater, and the 4 of us went on a family camping vacation in this car for 2 weeks throughout South Dakota and Wyoming. It was a great vacation. I loved it. but yeah, so we would drive. We went on road trips everywhere, and then also my mom's one of my mom's brothers lived in California, so he would come to visit. So it was always like, oh, this cool guy from California, and we would go out to visit him every now and then, like, not often, but, we went out to California a couple times. So I think just, traveling, road trips, and the idea of, knowing people living someplace that sounded so cool, like LA,
Right.
Yeah.
Now, and so when you finished when you were there, you were in Fremont, Nebraska the whole time through high school?
Yeah.
And everything?
Yeah.
And then thinking about that, when you were sort of on this particular moment where you were like, well, okay, now it's time for me to do this college thing. Was college, you were saying that your dad was an auto body worker. Was college a thing that was common in your family? Was it something that was sort of talked about, or was it something that you had to do?
I think not that I had to do, certainly that I wanted to do. Neither of my parents had gone to college. So I think, I just, growing up, was always a good student. I was, wasn't particularly a gifted student. I just always, worked hard and got, good grades. So, I think when it came to college there, I did have an interest in going elsewhere, but I got the best scholarship deal to Nebraska Wesleyan University, which is in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I stayed in Nebraska.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when you said that you were a good student, I know a lot of people who are good students, but I know a lot of people who are not good students.
Right.
Do you, and especially when we are here in the world as parents of young people who may or may not be good students, how do you, in your brain, how do you think about young Tracy in terms of your studiousness or maybe the cause of your enjoyment of study?
Gotcha. I think it was more competitive. Like, I just, I wanted to have good grades. And it wasn't necessarily that I wasn't really, I don't think I was particularly smart. I think I just tried hard, and
Right.
So I think I just felt like I had to have the best grades.
Now, was that something that sort of came up in the family? Is this like a first child thing? P.S.
Maybe.
I'm a first child, and I definitely did not have that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure, really.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now tell me about the school that you ended up going to for undergraduate.
So Nebraska Wesleyan, small private liberal arts school. in Lincoln. Of course, it's also where University of Nebraska Lincoln is with the big football stadium and all that stuff. So this is on the other side of town, but it was a great school. It was little, like maybe 1,200 students total, and through that the best part of having gone to that school is somehow Tad found his way up there, and that's where I met Tad. So that's why I'm grateful I landed there, and so did he.
Right. Now, what kind of things were you studying there? Were you mostly studying language?
So yeah, I was. I had in my head I was going to study German, so I studied German. I had no idea what I was going to do with that, and I had no plan. And I also, so I got a double major in global studies, which was an interdisciplinary degree, and then I also minored in Japanese. Right.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm super interested in that. I mean, partly because of my life earlier in a liberal arts college. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, one of the things I love about liberal arts colleges is the circuitous path and the mind-opening, world-seeing experience that college can be.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that. How was that for you in terms of getting there, having one idea, and then sort of shifting into these other ideas?
Yeah. Well, I think the good thing about that type of school was it was small enough where, I mean, I had classes where there were like half a dozen students, and I don't know where else that could kind of happen, so you got to form, pretty close relationships with professors who, then would, suggest things to you. So, so through that, I went and I did my junior year abroad. I lived in Germany for a year as part of this German major. That was awesome, and then, after college, well, I should say during college, I needed an internship as part of my German major, and that's how I got into museum work. I started working at the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia, and
that is like the most niche thing I can possibly imagine.
Yes.
Now tell me about this place. What was it?
So it's, and I haven't looked up on it in decades, so I can tell you, I think they still exist, but it's a historical society that's membership based. They had small exhibit area, but they had an archive. And so, so my internship was translating obituaries out of German language newspapers, because a big part of what they did was help people do genealogy research. So people who were like, oh, my family spoke German, but they said they came from Russia and they lived near Odessa, and how can that be? And so like figuring out that whole history thing. So anyways, yeah.
Now wait, so but you got to be out of the country for a part of your undergraduate. You were able to study abroad.
I did.
And where was it in Germany that you were?
I was in Trier, Germany, which is right near the Luxembourg border.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now talk about that. Yesterday I was meeting with Todd Richardson, and he was sort of talking about being able to go to England for a study abroad program. And I was not smart enough to think about that or do that. It wasn't even on my radar. But what about for you? How was that even on your radar? Was that just sort of like a kind of a hardwired or a thing that people talked about a lot at the school?
Yeah, well, I think for me it started in high school, because I think it was in my junior year of high school, the German club was planning a trip to Germany. Like our German teacher was like, organizing this thing, and so many students could go, and it cost X amount of dollars. And I was looking into it, and I was like, well, there's also this like summer exchange program. It costs the same amount. I could stay there like 3 times as long. And so I talked my parents into letting me apply to this exchange program. So I had gone and I had spent a summer in Germany living with a family between my junior and senior years of high school. So I kind of already was interested in that kind of experience. And so...
Now, where were you when you did that?
I was near, was this the town? I can't remember if it was the name of the town or the street. Wachenbuchen?
Okay.
I think that was the village.
And you were there for an entire summer?
For a summer, yeah.
Now, what does... I mean, because normally when you're doing a study abroad thing, usually you're in school, right? But like, what about with this program?
Yeah, no. So over part of the summer, they were still in school in Germany, right? Because they have a much shorter summer break than we have. So I went to school for a little bit with the girl who was in the family that I was living with, and like went on a school trip with them, and then like went on family summer vacation with them, went to a family wedding, did all that kind of cool stuff over a summer. It was great. Yeah.
And I would imagine your German would be pretty amazing at that point.
Yeah. Like I remember coming back for my senior year and my German teacher, tell us about your summer. And I, ramble off in German for, 20 minutes or something. And the rest of my classmates are just like not following me at all. So yeah, it did a lot to help me in terms of gaining conversational skills in that language. I think that's partly why, like, I was always better at talking in German rather than reading and writing in the language.
So you were sort of ready when you went later in college. Mm-hmm. And so when you were there in college, obviously the experience of a high schooler in Germany is different from one with like 4 more years or 3 more years of life underneath your belt. Mm-hmm. How was it different for you?
Well, in this case, I was, living in a dorm with other students, but unfortunately, they kind of dropped all of us Americans together in the same place. So I ended up just hanging out with a bunch of Americans and some British people, and so, which, had I maybe been a little more intentional, would have tried to branch out and make some friendships with people who actually lived in Germany. But I mean, it was great in terms of going to university there. That was really interesting and challenging. And then, while I was there, just did as much traveling as I could. I maxed out my credit cards and, learned that you have a limit on how much cash advance you can get on your credit card one time when I was in England and ran out of money. So
now, where all did you go when you were doing this traveling, because you were so close?
Went to Paris a lot. Like Paris was a 3-hour train ride away, I think. So, I was like, you want to go, met a friend there, one of my friends a couple doors down, you want to go to Paris this weekend? Sure,
Now, at that point, were your excursions, were they more institutional or going to see museums or going to see, that kind of thing? Mm-hmm. And then in what way?
Well, I think I did get to be good friends with a woman there who was originally from Poland, but then had immigrated and had gone to high school in New Jersey. And she and I went to a lot of museums. So like in Paris, we went to the Picasso Museum. We went to Musée d'Orsay. We went to the Louvre. Like, she and I went and did all of that stuff together. And that was great.
And I'm super interested, like, in the way that we all go to those museums. We all have sort of a common experience. But I'm interested in, like, when you were recalling this information, you had these 2 or 3 places that you sort of pulled from memory. And so what was it about those places in particular you think that stuck with you, or how do you think you experienced them? What was it about them that drew you?
Yeah. Well, I guess, I think partly, like, and I think until I like went into museum studies, it was like I always felt like, once you went to a museum, you were like obligated. You were there to learn. And so, you felt like I had to read everything and do all of that. And so I think, one, the Louvre is huge. There's no way you can do all of that. So quickly you figure out, maybe that's not what you need to do in every museum, Right. But I think like going to Musée d'Orsay, that's just, such an amazing place, and that former train station, it's just, beautiful. But then what I remember about trying to go to the Picasso Museum was, because it, was in a different location at that time. This was in the early 90s. And I didn't speak French. My friend Kathy didn't speak French. We're trying to find it. We're lost. And so, we would go up to French people and we would say, pardon. And we would say, Musée Picasso. And then they would be like, blah, 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 blah. And we would be like, merci. And we would walk a little ways towards where they pointed, and we'd ask again. And then they would be like, blah, blah, blah. And that's how we found the Picasso Museum. That's like my memory of that. But then we went back. Tad and Anna and I went back to the museum, which is, I can't remember when they reopened, but when we took Anna for her first trip to Europe back in 2017, I think it was, and it's amazing and beautiful and awesome. So.
Now, I've never been to the Picasso Museum.
It's cool.
So what's cool about it?
So what this is reminding me of when you asked me if I had art in my house growing up. Sorry.
That's okay.
I mean, I did actually. My mom and dad actually had, I think, like a Picasso replica something in the house growing up. Now that I think about it, because it was, one of the weird faces and profile, or I can't remember now what it was, but whatever they would have had in the 70s. So
that's a huge thing that you just
know,
totally overlooked and just like waltzed past. Like my parents were crazy, weird art hippie people, and they didn't even have a Picasso thing in the house. I didn't even know who that was for years. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll just edit that in later and try and figure that out. So, but I'm curious too, like some people kind of go to those places as out of a sense of obligation. And I like that thing that you talked about in going there, which is something I never would have had on my radar, which is the idea that you're supposed to kind of go and read all of the text and learn and have it be a kind of almost like a classroom experience that you're having there. And so when you were going to those and you are, to me, one of the things that I think that's really interesting about looking back at those early visits now that we're grown-ups and we can kind of think about how those experiences may have informed our later experience or our greater understanding of the world. And so I'm curious about how you think about those excursions now as a grown-up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess just thinking about how just how freaking lucky I was, I guess. I mean, really, just to get to do all of that, and again, like going into college, knowing I was interested in studying a foreign language, to get to do something I had no idea what, but I think, that eventually led to this, internship experience, which eventually led to, a museum studies academic path, which then, ends up bringing us, that didn't bring us to Memphis, but, getting to do really amazing things here in Memphis. And so I think maybe it's just how things all magically kind of work together to get you ready for something you may not know you wanted, maybe. I don't know.
Well, also one of the things that I'm super interested in terms of thinking about people's stories is I'm interested in, like you were saying, that the museum, the internship sort of clicked or opened an awareness in your mind of something that you might be interested in doing. And I think like there's something about our lives as young people where we're exposed to a lot of different things, particularly in college. And there's always kind of like a, it's almost like the people who want to be married, it's like anytime we like go into a grocery store and then we like run into somebody that is reasonably attractive and we're like, oh my God, maybe I could marry this person, like that kind of thing. But it's a kind of, because it's you're sort of like looking out and thinking about the possibility of a future and the possibility of really a kind of a lifelong passion or a lifelong interest.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what was it about that internship at the particularly niche institution of German Russians in Nebraska?
Right. Well, I think honestly, so I had the internship and then I graduated and again, didn't have a plan. The one plan I did have, the friend Kathy from studying in Germany, we were going to move to Portland, Oregon because she had a friend there. And well, let's just move there and we'll figure it out. Sure, sounds great. So Kathy gets there before I did, and she's like, I can't live here. I can't do this. And I'm like, no, I'm going to be there. Just hang on. And then she's like, nope. And meanwhile, the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia director said, "Do you want a job?" And I was like, "Sure," since the, little bitty idea of some plan that I had just fell through. So sure. So anyway, so I end up working at there doing like reference archive work, and then back to the point about being at a small liberal arts college. My advisor calls me up one day and was like, "Hey, I just learned about this program. I think you should do this." It was Teach Hungary, and it was in the early 90s, so right when all of these Eastern European countries were regaining independence, and in schools they were switching from teaching Russian to teaching English, and so they were sending over a bunch of college graduates to go and teach English in Hungary and in Romania, and so I went to Hungary to go and teach English for a year.
I mean, I'm struck by a bunch of things. One, I'm struck by this like superpower of being able to grapple with and learn languages. I mean, to me, that is particularly interesting, and it really is like a superpower as someone who has tried to learn many languages and failed horribly at all of them. But I also am really interested in this willingness to just be confronted with something really kind of scary and potentially traumatic, like a plan to go to Portland, Oregon, and then having that sort of pulled out from underneath you, and then falling into this position at this museum, but then also this possibility of going to Hungary, especially thinking about, well, I mean, maybe it's not such a crazy thing since you had already traveled abroad and lived abroad for, a couple of stints that had some good length to them.
Yeah.
But now when you went to Hungary, you were thinking about kind of doing this on your own. That's a different kind of a situation.
Yeah. I mean, there was a program, so there was some infrastructure there, and like I didn't have to find my own place to live. I didn't have to, like they found me a job, they found me a place to live. That's big, and so. And there was there were other people there in that program, so I also had, other Americans to connect with, and because, Hungarian is, it's in its own language family. It's part of the Finno-Ugric language family. The next closest related language is Finnish, so that's really interesting and weird. But anyway, so like people that I could communicate with, so so that was helpful.
Right. Now, earlier you mentioned meeting Tad.
Yes.
And then did Tad also go with you to Hungary?
So Tad and I were friends for a couple of years. We started dating like not long before I was going to Hungary, and so I went to Hungary, was there for a couple of months, and then Tad just came to Hungary. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, how long were you there in Hungary?
We were there, I guess I was there for maybe about 10 months total, just short of a year, because I injured my knee and had to have knee surgery, so came back.
Now, you were saying that Hungary was at this sort of pivotal moment in its history, and then part of that was the switch from teaching German, or rather teaching Russian, to teaching English. What are some other, I'm super curious about, I've never been to Hungary, and so I'm super curious about what it was like, but also in this very particular point in its history.
Yeah. It was all very interesting. It was like before I got there, I thought, oh, it'll be like living in Budapest and living in these old, like pre-World War II era lovely apartment buildings. And, I lived in Eger, which is east of Budapest, and you end up getting an apartment in one of those like Eastern Bloc apartment buildings, kind of Bauhaus style, very not lovely and beautiful like the old buildings in Budapest, but but it was really interesting too. I mean, there were still like horse-drawn carts coming into the city center from the surrounding villages and stuff, and it's Eger is a wine growing region, and so they had a wine valley, and they had all these little like cellars where you could go into the different families that would make and sell their wine in these cellars. And it also, I think if I've got my history right, it was the like northernmost point of the Ottoman Empire, and so they had a minaret in the middle of town, so that also was really interesting. So it it was great. It was different.
What'd you do to your knee?
I fell out of a tree.
I love that. Perfect.
Yeah.
And so you had to come back home.
So I had to come back home. Yeah, I had a couple of knee injuries before that, and I think it was just the one that finally, I severed my ACL and had to come home.
Oh
so,
my goodness!
Yeah. I mean, no, I could have stayed there because I told my organizer of this program, hey, I hurt my knee, I need to come back. And she's like, okay, well, let me see how I can help you. She's like, actually, we have the surgeon who works with the Hungarian Olympic team would like to do your knee surgery because I was in America. I don't know, it was weird. And I was like, that sounds really nice, but I don't understand anything being said around me. I mean, I knew enough Hungarian to go and buy onions at the market, so I was like, no, I think I need to understand what's going on here. So so I came back home.
So what happens when you get back home?
Ted and I come back, and my mom had multiple knee surgeries. So I go to my mom's knee surgeon and had a knee surgery, and then we moved to Dallas after that.
All right. What's happening in Dallas?
Not much.
I love how every once in a while you pick up your water bottle like you're going to take a drink. You're welcome to take a drink.
Okay, thank you. Well, I thought, and then I started talking. So
We'll pause
Okay.
here. We'll insert some clown music. Okay, some
Mm-hmm.
travel to Dallas music.
Okay, all right. Dallas, I mean, we're just trying to figure out what the hell we were going to do. So I worked as a receptionist, and Tad, I think, was going to school, and we hung out for a year, and then we decided to move to New Mexico. So we moved there, but that was really difficult. We didn't last there long. So we were only there 4 months, and then we moved back to Nebraska.
Just out of curiosity, what's difficult about New Mexico?
It was more expensive than Dallas, and jobs paid less. Kind of like my not really a plan to move to Portland. We had kind of a not really a plan to move to New Mexico. We just went there because it was pretty.
Right.
And we were really, really broke, and so we left. And then while we were there, I just was trying to figure out what to do, emailed the folks back at the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia, and they're like, hey, we have a job again. Do you want it? I was like, sure. So we came back to Nebraska, and I started working back at the museum there.
How long were you there? Was it the same situation in terms of your job?
Yeah, it changed a little bit, but basically, doing reference archive work, and then at that point, I was kind of put in the responsibility of managing their collections, their artifacts, but I didn't really have the skill set to do that. So then that's kind of what led me then to pursue the museum studies degree. Was I knew I needed more information and knowledge to do what I needed to do and to do it well. So we were there for 4 years, and while we were there, I did my master's in museum studies, and then once we wrapped that up, we came down here to Memphis for Tad to go to grad school.
So now, I'm also wondering, what was it that you ran into that made you say, you know what, I need a degree in this?
Well, I guess one, coming out of undergrad, kind of all the people I was, friends with, everyone was like, yeah, I know I want to go to grad school. I don't know what for yet. I'm going to take some time to figure it out. And I definitely was in that. I'm like, I'm not going to just spend money on a degree I don't know what to do with. So it was always kind of, in my mind that I needed to do that. And so when I was doing work that I didn't, I knew I needed more information to do it well. And I just looked into the university and found they had a great museum studies program. Unfortunately, they dropped it one year when they had to make budget cuts, but it was a really great program.
And that was the program at the University of Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were able to sort of stay near Lincoln or in Lincoln.
Yep.
And then you said that program was 4 years long?
Well, I was working full time and going to school, so
Okay.
it took me a little longer to do the master's degree. Yep.
Now, I don't know anything about a master's degree in museum studies.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that it's probably one of those things that sort of has its ups and downs, and then also one of those things where a kind of passion is really solidified and nurtured. And I'm wondering about that process, and then what if, because you've done several things where you've said going to do this, and then you recognize that it was not a thing that was right. And I'm curious about what it was about this particular path where along it you said, this is good, this is right.
Well, I guess one, I already had a job in it, so I think partly that was like, okay, this, unlike my undergraduate education that I didn't, immediately connect employment to, although with the job at the, Historical Society, it did kind of turn into that. But beyond that, I didn't really know what to do with it, right? So I think it was, one, it was, and kind of coming back to your other questions about, family and growing up and what kind of sparked those interests. And I think, the travel with the family vacations, the going to the museums, the, going to the historical places and all of that, just, kind of through all of that, just felt like it made sense and was compelling and interesting and challenging too. And then the other part really was when, when we were, then coming to Memphis for Tad to go to grad school at the College of Art. I just kind of took a scattershot approach and contacted every museum in town and was like, hey, I have collections management experience. Do you have any jobs? And luckily it worked out.
Now, when we talk about collections management experience, what is it that we're talking about in terms of nuts and bolts?
So things like, the working at the Germans from Russia Museum, the reference archive work that's really kind of doing research for people or helping people do research. The collections management side is, taking care of artifacts and, making sure they're documented properly and cared for, and, you have the information you need to interpret them, and when they're exhibited and put into, your installations, you have the proper controls to ensure their preservation long term and all of that good stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, that also sort of ties in with that thing that you were talking about when you were talking about going to the Louvre and thinking about it as a kind of educational experience, and then also sort of thinking about it as a possibility for a greater engagement, where it isn't just, let's look at this thing and have it be a kind of entertainment, but instead it's this sort of a possibility for a greater and broader connection.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you guys decided to come to Memphis, Tad is going to school here. You send out some applications, and where did you end up?
I ended up at the Civil Rights Museum. I remember one day I was still working at the museum in Lincoln, and Barbara Andrews, who used to be the curator at the Civil Rights Museum, called me up one day and she was like, hey, we need a registrar. And I was like, great, I can totally do that. I said that a little more professionally, of course. But
Right. Now, I mean, in Memphis, of course, that institution is particularly well known. But what about elsewhere? I mean, was it something that was on your radar, or was it something that you just sort of knew about because there was you were coming to Memphis?
Well, when we knew we were coming to Memphis, and I just, looked up what museums were in town, of course, looking that up and finding that, I was like, oh, wow. That's amazing, and what an incredible institution. At the time, they were also developing the Rock and Soul Museum, and then the Wonder Series was still going on at that time. So honestly, I had just contacted everybody and was just looking for any opportunity that might exist, and feel really super fortunate that at the time, Barbara was looking to, at the time the museum was getting ready to receive and this is kind of wild, but they were getting ready to receive the collection of evidence from the assassination of Dr. King, and they didn't have, at the time, a collections management system in place. And so when we got here, went and met with Barbara and then Beverly Robertson, who was the director at the time, and then started as the museum's first registrar. So one of my first responsibilities was to get a system in place and then to receive and catalog that collection of evidentiary artifacts.
That must have been a monumental pressure.
Oh my God, yes, yeah, it was crazy. Like,
And I mean, how did you raise yourself to the level of being able to do that kind of thing? Because you were sort of fresh out of school.
I think just well, luckily, I mean, I had the support of Beverly and Barbara. Barbara sent me to some conferences where it was looking at specifically how to care for these types of collections, and so that was really helpful. And then really, I think I just kind of coming out of this experience working at this very small culturally specific museum, and then just really applying everything that I had learned coming through grad school. And because at the time too, the museum was developing the expanded exhibits where they interpreted the Dr. King's assassination. So I also got to work on that project. So, it was just kind of like all of a sudden, every opportunity of, anyone interested in museum studies, I had it, and I learned so much, and just really so fortunate to have the chance to work at that institution for as long as I did.
I mean, it's such a massive responsibility, and also sort of one of those things where you were coming from away with no real connection to the city or to the institution itself, or perhaps to the historical event. And so, here you are, you're coming in sort of as this outsider. I would imagine it was both a sort of a daunting task, but then also sort of one of those things where you really don't necessarily just have to like rise to the occasion, but you also have to be able to take in the fullness of this task. And you were saying that working closely with Barbara and Beverly, I mean, Barbara is such a powerful force, and so I'm curious about what it was like to work with her.
So, I mean, it was great. I learned a lot. So Barbara, started her career as a registrar herself. So, so that was really helpful, just to have that advice from her. And, she had come out of, I think like the Ohio State Historical Society is where she had worked before. She had come down to Memphis. And then, the other thing that, we got to work on, since, we were, Beverly was working on, well, the whole team, honestly, was working on raising money for the expanded museum. And then one of the questions came up about, well, how do we, what do we need to do to be accredited, to get accreditation from the American, at the time it was American Association of Museums. And so because I was just coming out of where I had come from, I was given the opportunity to manage those projects. And so I think just, to your point, I think just rising to the occasion, just, realizing that's, incredible opportunity to get to do this really important work that's also very challenging, and to do it for such an important institution for the city of Memphis,
Now, when we're thinking about the Civil Rights Museum, how many people were sort of in the, because when we go there, of course, we don't see the offices. We don't intentionally, we don't see the people behind the scenes that make all of these things happen. And so I'm curious, as a person with that information, how exactly was the museum itself structured, and who were the people, and how did they work?
Oh, gosh.
I know, it's like a pop quiz. Do not forget anybody, Tracy. Make sure that you include every single board member and every person. But I'm curious, because we know that it's this institution, and we know it. We've been there.
Yeah. Well, I think so I was at the museum 2 different times. So first time I was there was from 2000 to 2005, and that's when they expanded the exhibits, which they're now redoing and doing all that. So I'm excited to see that. But it was, in terms of the sort of curatorial team, it was me and Barbara. But then for the exhibit development, of course, we had exhibit designers, media producers. I think they hired some, like content specialists, and that all was really helpful because I got to, kind of see how that work progressed in for that type of project. Then for when I came back to the museum later and worked, and we fully renovated the original exhibits. So all of that was really great preparation then for that later project.
Now, how long did you say that you had been there? Because you were there for a while, and then went away, and then to prison and worked on license plates. But you were there how long?
Arts license plates only. Yes.
How long were you there initially?
2000 to 2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And then what ended up happening in 2005?
Well, that's when I went to Delta Access, because I was on the board. I think I came on the board just as you were coming off the board of Delta Access, and then they were looking to hire somebody, and I was like, well, I think I might be interested. And so then I did that for 2.5-ish years. Yeah.
Now, I think this might be the first time that Delta Access actually has come up. I mean, we've mentioned the Powerhouse a couple of times in several of our conversations that I've had here. But will you give us a sort of a brief overview of the very lengthy history of this organization?
So, and you probably know the history better than I do.
I'll chime in if something comes up.
But so at the time, I came on in 2005, and so Contemporary Art and Film, and operated at the time Marshall Arts Gallery and the Powerhouse Gallery and the Indie Memphis Film Festival. So I was the only full-time employee, and I learned a lot. I learned, I think, more in those 2 years than I did during my grad school. It was a big education. Yes.
No, that was a massive shift. I mean, of course, there's a kind of administrative acumen that you have to sort of come in with, but this is a radical shift from an historical institution that, for the most part, doesn't really have or connected to the art world. I know that they did some exhibitions there at the museum, but for the most part, it was known as an historical institution. And then making the shift to contemporary art. Talk a little bit about that. That must have been daunting in a way, but also familiar.
Well, I think so. Having been at the museum and working with Barbara Andrews, so she also had a big, visual art background as well. And part of what we were responsible for at the museum was putting those temporary exhibits into that gallery space there. So, so that also kind of taught me a lot, and kind of, prepped me in some ways for that Delta Access work. Whereas, it was during those 5 years working with Barbara that we brought in like Whitfield Lavelle and his cabin that we installed at the exhibit there, which was this really amazing installation. So, and then of course, being married to a visual artist, and just around that, it's, I think it, it didn't feel so much like a leap. And it was, for me, it was, like wanting to try out that executive director role. And, I did not have experience like doing the, development side, raising dollars and all of that. And that's such a key part of any nonprofit organization. So it was a chance to kind of get some experience with that. And, now, in the role I'm in now at ARTSmemphis, we work with so many organizations that are kind of like Delta Access in structure. There's, really small committed group of folks working, to make make great work happen. And there's, usually like in cases of small organizations when it's, like one full-time employee, and I know all the different ways in which they are stretched. It's, it's tough.
Right.
Yeah.
No, you were saying that you're in your time there, you felt like you learned more than you did in all of the grad school. I'm curious about that.
Well, I think, actually, doing the work of coordinating a board, working with a board to, develop your strategic plan, to realize your plan, to do the fundraising, to set the priorities, to manage the budget, like, all of those things, in grad school is all, this is what you should do. And then it's another thing when you get into the work to actually do it, so.
Because really you're sort of in this position where if it needs to be done, you're the one that does it.
Yes.
And so whether that's making sure that the work is installed right, or making sure that the invites are there, or making, it's, and then all of the bureaucratic aspects of it is also related in there. And I would imagine that your position at the Civil Rights Museum, while it wasn't necessarily like siloed, I would imagine that the parameters of your responsibility were more clearly defined.
Oh yeah.
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 Now, and now thinking about that, I'm curious about, because you were there for some really powerful, important exhibitions, and so I'm curious about that aspect, because I know working with a board and working with the things that you do at the Civil Rights Museum were really different than the kind of intimate workings with these artists who were coming in town to execute these exhibitions. And so I'm curious about some of those in particular. And then also, to back up just a second, hang on. How, so again, we haven't really talked at all about Powerhouse. How did, because that was the gist of your work, right? In terms of the outward facing aspect of Delta Axis.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the goals of Powerhouse and how it worked?
Well, I think, the goals of Powerhouse were to bring, artists with, really international recognition to Memphis, to, see how, what's in Memphis, meet the people here in Memphis, get kind of the vibe of Memphis, and then to create an installation at what was the coolest looking contemporary art gallery in town, create an awesome exhibition in that space. And so I think it was, partly exposure of, internationally recognized artists for people in Memphis, but then I think also vice versa, that, letting those folks know what we have here.
And so when you came in, it was already sort of going. And so when you were there, you said you started in 2005.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what were some of the things that you guys did in terms of the exhibitions?
Well, I guess probably one of the most significant ones that I recall was Wageshi Mutu. That was pretty amazing to work with her on that. So,
now, the story of me meeting Wageshi Mutu is one that I tell my students all the time. Because I remember you brought her to Rhodes, and we had an opening. I can't remember what the opening was, but I do remember her coming in, and I remember saying, "Oh my God, who is this? Who is this glamorous person?" Because I remember she had this like electric blue hair.
She had those blue braids.
And I just remember her just kind of being kind of heavenly and glamorous and sexy and beautiful
all
and
of that.
Powerful and all of the things, And I just remember thinking, this woman is not from here. Who is this, And then I saw her with you, and I was like, oh my goodness, because I already had known her work. But I'm super curious in terms of telling, because I think one of the things that I'm interested in this process too of these interviews is thinking about those connections with the greater world, and then also the impact that those events have had on the city and vice versa. And so I'm curious in terms of working with Wageshi Mutu, this international renowned artist. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the, great things that Delta Access is in terms of bringing people here. I think one of the shortfalls of it was there weren't enough resources to really take advantage of that in all the ways we could have, like what could it have been to have her deliver an artist talk at Rhodes College, for example, or like I'm trying to, I can't remember who all we showed while I was there, but Alex Soth was another one. Like, what would it be for him to maybe teach a photography class somewhere? Like those kinds of things I think would have even added a lot more value to that and could have been more impactful for the community as well as for those artists, I think. So that I think was a missed opportunity, but, again, there's, we're just kind of constrained by the resources we had available to us.
Well, I mean, for me, one of the things that I think is so great about that Powerhouse experience for me was that I was really able to see, and I think a lot of the people who were associated with it and witnessed it were able to look at it and recognize those things that you were talking about, while at the same time being very thankful for the possibilities that it did provide.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for sure it is a kind of cautionary tale. I mean, I think that the things that were accomplished with it were really unprecedented and really just kind of possible because of the drive of the people involved, both the Delta Access Board, but then also Peter Fleissig, and the hubris and the wonderful hubris of that project and saying, okay, here's this space, let's make it into a contemporary art space and let's do this crazy thing. And I think, of course, there are some missteps that would happen in any kind of Herculean, really kind of heroic task, as flawed or as wonderful as it might be. I mean, to me, it's one of those things where we can say, we did this, and these things happened, and these things were pretty amazing. I mean, I remember that Wangechi Mutu show. I mean, it was this thing where they were bullet holes in the walls, these sort of faux bullet holes in the walls, and these like wounds sort of seeping from it. And then, full disclosure, I love her collages a lot. And I remember there were a few collages, and it was one of those things where I was like, oh man, there need to be more collages, like I want to see some more painting, of course, duh. But also, like, I do remember the pieces that were there were sort of small and really wonderful in that upper space. And then I remember downstairs there was this, like, if I remember it right, it was hot plates with wine.
Yes.
And then there were these like clotheslines strung about. And I remember the show was really a perfect example of how someone can address that space.
Yes.
And how that worked. But I'm curious, like, in terms of working with her when she got here, in your handling of them. I mean, one of the things I love about having worked as a curator is that kind of midwifery that happens in terms of helping the person execute the show. And so, I mean, since we're thinking about her, I'm curious what that experience was like for you.
Well, I think luckily, at the time, this was when Georgia Creason was at MCA, and she just kept giving me a steady stream of interns out of MCA. And so thankfully what happened was, Wageshi, how they would do is like come down for like an advanced trip. So come down, check it out, and then think about what you want to do, and then come back and do it, install the show, and then we'll have an opening, like make the work, do whatever, and then we'll open it up, right? And so Wageshi had, figured out what she wanted to do, and then came down and said, this is what I need to do. And I would say, okay, I need X number of students. And then Georgia would send them over, and we put them to work. So like maybe a half a dozen female students from the College of Art came and helped for that whole week during her getting ready for that installation. So it was a team of people that made it happen, and it was, everyone of course was just thrilled to be a part of it.
And also, I mean, one of the things I know and I'm sort of thinking about with that kind of work is the kind of connection that happens not just between the artist and the person who's sort of the wrangler, but also thinking about sort of the outward facing component of that job, you know, and how it really is sort of impactful and driven and focused towards the community. And I know that is a little bit different than your experience that you had before when you were at the Civil Rights Museum. And I'm curious how that either scratched an itch for you or helped you understand a part of your practice as an administrator, curator person.
I mean, I think, I guess what I'm, what kind of comes to mind is just, and to your point, I mean, I think it was an amazing thing, but I think there's like so many stories and like this storytelling to come out of that. Again, just right now I'm just thinking, oh, we could have, you know, we could have done this, should have done that, and all of that. And I think what it is just, you know, one, so, you know, not being an artist myself, you know, living with an artist and, you know, just respecting that compulsion that y'all have to create is just an amazing thing to really see happen, and how it unfolds for each artist is pretty amazing, you know. So I think to be a part of helping to enable those ideas, those visions, those, you know, creative ideas, I mean, that's it's challenging and it's incredibly gratifying. So yeah.
I love the way you talked about that. I mean, it was almost as if you were like, and then that leads me into ARTSmemphis. But I mean, you know, and I think too, you know, one of the classes I teach at U of M is that professional practices class, and in it we talk to a lot of people who do things that are art adjacent, you know, and really the goal of the class is to say like, hey, you know, you could also do these things when you graduate, you know, that you don't have to just sit in a room and make art.
Right.
But I think one of the things that you're talking about is this kind of transformative metamorphosis of an idea or a set of circumstances, you know, whether it's the mission statement of an institution, but really what you're talking about is you're talking about taking a thing, an idea, and then really sort of bringing it to life, and all of the different machinations that sort of go on behind the scenes in order to make these things happen.
Yeah.
And there's a real pleasure in that, you know, whether it's helping someone else do that project or you doing the project by yourself, but also seeing something go from an idea to being something that exists in the world as beautiful and as flawed as all of those things can be, learning experiences as those things can be. To me, that feels really interesting, and it feels really satisfying, and it feels really like the kinds of things that we think of as our work, you know? Yeah. But thinking about Delta Axis, I mean, one of the things that I'm interested in, too, is this idea of the oral history and the idea of being able to talk about some of the things that, you know, happened there. And so, I mean, I am curious, you know, you were talking about working with Wangechi Mutu and then also with Alex Soth. I know that there were a lot of other projects that you were a part of there. And just saying, you know, here we are, we're in this room with this great microphone. And are there any cool stories you want to tell us that won't get us arrested?
Well, I guess just thinking about other shows that happened there, Josh Smith had that show with 100 canvases that he made in a week. You know, that was, I think he slept on the floor of the powerhouse while he was there. The other one, oh man, I'm forgetting the woman's name, but we bought her a polar bear suit so that she could put on a polar bear suit and climb the smokestack of the powerhouse in the polar bear suit. I can't remember her name.
Well, I love how, I mean, for me also there is a kind of, one of the things I love about art. And one of the things I love about that particular institution is that it's also kind of like a source of like urban legend, you know? And so like this thing about how, you know, like when you were talking about the Wangechi Ubuntu thing, you know, or the Alex O thing, or Kristen. Could it be Kristen?
It could be Kristen. Damn.
But that thing,
that
where
thing.
it was like, was it really her? Was it someone else? You know, that climbed the thing, and then it's also kind of one of those things where it becomes a kind of like game of telephone. Where in my brain right now, I'm thinking that part of the urban legend was that she dumped someone's ashes in the smokestack, or is that just totally me?
Oh, no, I think you're right. I think that was part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I think that was real.
Okay. And then also part of it is also, you know, me like trying to figure out like what is real and what was dream and what else was going on there.
Yeah. The other thing that I definitely remember from that are the Dada balls. And, you know, which we tried as a fundraiser. Janine Jablonski, I think, had come up with that idea, and who later ended up running a contemporary gallery in Portland. So Portland came back around. Anyways, but yeah, the Dada balls were another big memory from that time.
Well, also, I mean, one of the things to me that was really interesting and strange about being connected to Delta Axis was was just how particularly common it was for people to be there, and people that were kind of like fixtures in the art world, but how it kind of became this like sort of common thing. You know, like I remember at some point, you know, James was like, oh, you know, there's a bunch of people in town for the show, and can you mind driving them around? And like they want to go to, you know, thrift stores. And so like at some point, like I drove Paul Graham and Laura Hopman and some other people around to go thrift stores. And then it was only later that I realized that, oh, well, Paul Graham is the, you know, grandfather of color photography in Britain or whatever, you know. And then there would be Eggleston, and he would come in and do something. And then there'd be Peter Sheldall, and he would be in there, and he would be doing this thing.
Yeah, and I took Renica Dykstra to church at Al Green's church one Sunday. You know? Like, yeah.
No, and now that I remember that project being particularly interesting. And were you a part of the Renica Dykstra thing as well?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so I remember that was a really wonderful exhibition, and I remember that it was a like sort of a Herculean task. Like they brought in a DJ and people danced, and I don't know if I've ever seen that piece.
I don't know that it ended up becoming a piece. I think sometime later, because at the time it was right. Like I think it was the year that Lil Buck was graduating from high school.
Okay.
And so he was coming in, and I remember one time later, a couple years later, after he had, you know, kind of burst out nationally, you know, on the scene, and I'd emailed her, hey, you know, this guy that you know, had put in this, you know, film project as a high school student is now, you know, performing in New York with the New York City Ballet or something, you know.
Now was her visit with MCA, was that connected through that? Because I remember she gave a lecture at MCA at some point. Was that through Delta Axis?
It might have been, yeah. I don't
Oh, we're all just kind of mushy. We're showing it's like 4:30. It's my nap time. Okay, so, and then once you finished with Delta Axis, you ended up going back to the Civil Rights Museum.
I did.
What facilitated that transition?
Beverly Robertson had invited me back to work on the renovation project. So, yep.
So it was this, you were like, the renovation project, this massive undertaking that was going on there at the Civil Rights Museum. Give us a sense of that scale and that scope.
Yeah, so I can't remember all the numbers now, but it was a $27.5 million project, 40,000 square feet, I think, but a complete renovation of the original permanent exhibits in the Lorraine Motel building. So, so important, you know, important work. For me, what was really great for me, I basically got to, you know, relearn American history through working on that project. We worked with some amazing scholars through that, and just, you know, looking at, you know, where the museum starts, you know, with the arrival of the first enslaved Africans coming to North America all the way through, Dr. King's assassination at that location in 1968. So it was, again, just, a great responsibility, incredible learning opportunity, and we had an absolutely phenomenal team and put together what I think is the best museum of American history in the country.
And then, okay, so as we say that, what makes it so? I mean, I'm curious as a lay person who doesn't necessarily go to historical museums with as much regularity and as much diligence as I should.
Well, I think a couple of things. One, I think, just the significance of the site, the being at the Lorraine Motel where Dr. King was assassinated, the significance of that location. But I think to, then to examine American history through the lens of African American history really gives a much more thorough and complete understanding of our nation's history and of where we are today because of that. And I think the exhibit designers, we worked with great scholars that, kind of helped drive that message. We worked with really great exhibit designers that created these immersive environments that kind of put you in that place. So, when you're, in a courtroom for the Brown v. Board decision, you're in a classroom for, how that decision played out. You're on the street for the, March on Washington, you're at the sit-in counter, so creating those really immersive experiences to put you in that historical moment. And I think it's a really, really, I think we did a really good job.
Now, was it a project where, if I remember right, when you came in to do this project, it was sort of a finite project. It was this thing where you came in, they invited you back to do this huge Herculean task. And then did it have an end point, or was it one of those things where you were able to stay and do more work there?
Yeah, no, I was able to stay. We opened the museum in 2014. And then Beverly Robertson left the museum at the end of that year. And so I, stayed at the museum, but, at the time, when we finished that, I was like, this is, the project of a career to just project manage this huge renovation, but I'm like, I still have a lot of career left. So whatever will I do with myself, So I think for still work at the museum and still, there's still, really proud of all of that work and the work that came after that. But I think at that time I was really kind of interested in seeing what the next challenge was. So.
And then how did that present itself?
Well, I ran into Elizabeth Rouse at I can't remember whose show it was, at David Lesk Gallery when they were over on Flicker Street. And I ran into her and I was like, oh, hey, she and I were in the same Leadership Memphis class together, whatever year that was. And anyway, so I was like, oh, hey, I'm looking, if you hear of anything, let me know. And then like a year later, she emailed me and was like, hey, we have this opportunity. And so I applied and started working at ARTSmemphis.
Okay, now to back up just a little bit,
yes.
a whole lot actually.
Okay.
So you came to Memphis in 2000.
Yes.
Now that again was sort of an important time in the history of the city, and then in terms of thinking about its particular visual arts culture. What are some things that you remember about that initial trip? Aside from the barbecue was really great.
Well, we never came to Memphis until before moving here. Like we just came to Memphis. So
I love this. I love this spirit, this adventurous spirit. That
well, it
you're
ends
coming
there.
back
We've been
to.
here almost 25 years now. We've never gone anywhere else.
Right. So now, but you get here, but I am curious. Like, what were your impressions of the city? I mean, of course, it's all very glowing. But what are some things that you remember about the city itself and at that time?
Sure. Well, I guess what I remember, like arriving and coming across the bridge, seeing the city, it's like, wow, this is a real city. Having lived in places, small cities and like, wow, this feels like a really feels like Dallas, like big like Dallas, right? And and then also coming out of Nebraska, I was like, oh, we're going to a big city. It'll be this like super progressive place, Then I figured out Memphis is really just a big small town, which is part of the beauty of it, right? And so. And initially, when we first got here, I couldn't figure out how all of a sudden people could pronounce our last name more accurately. Like all of a sudden it was like Lauritzen Wright. And I was like, okay, closer. Yeah, good job. But then I figured out, oh, there's a basketball player with this name. That's why, so,
Because, it really is a huge shift. I know the Midwest is a particular kind of environment and a particular kind of pace and timing and all of the social cues. And then I know you had the time in Dallas, but we know that Texas does not count as the South. It is Texas.
Right.
And
yes.
so to then come to Memphis, obviously that's also a great shift. And so I'm curious about how some of that worked in terms of your internal metronome being adjusted to its pace.
Well, I think having gone to other places and lived in places where I didn't speak the language or what, was kind of good preparation for coming to Memphis too. Like initially when I would meet people and say where I was from, they're like, oh, it's got to be so different here. And at first I was like, no, not really, just because, everyone was super friendly, very warm. It wasn't till, spent a little time and it's like, oh yeah, it's totally different. But in a good way, so, I think, just one, coming down here, Tad, fell in, with the visual art community really quickly through MCA and then through David Less Gallery. I started working at the museum, I think 3 weeks after we moved here. So, really quickly we both kind of, fell into places where we could invest ourselves and our energy. And then I think really honestly having the visual art community to connect with, everybody was super welcoming and, the active exhibitions every month and going out and meeting people. It just, we kind of very quickly ended up with a community of people and friends that made it all feel really good.
One of the things I'm struck with too, not just sort of, sitting here doing this interview, but one of the things I'm really struck by is how you and Tad are sort of like a team or like this kind of like social component, and you're at the openings and you're at the different events and there is a kind of outward facing part of it. And then I like how also now it's also sort of a trio thing where, of course, Anna has come to the art openings since, poor kid was little,
right.
But how it's kind of like a team thing. And I'm really struck by that and how interesting and also kind of envious that it is and how it seems to work and how it seems to be. And there's really no question here. This is just something that I'm struck with. But I think also, like with this job at ARTSmemphis, there's also this kind of like, there's Tad and there's Tracy and there's Tad and Tracy and, like they, they're kind of this component. And so, I think it seems like when you got your job there, my brain was like, oh, well, that's a totally logical extension of what Tracy has been thinking about and been active in, whether it's been, like on a board or like like an actual job. All of those things, to me, it feels like a totally logical step. It doesn't feel out of left field at all. But I'm curious how that transitioned from going from the Civil Rights Museum to ARTSmemphis. I'm curious about that transition and how that worked for you.
Yeah, it was. So again, I also had a lot of support, moving into that role. So Elizabeth was really supportive, really great. And I think like what I say about making that change is, having come from the Civil Rights Museum and having been there, I think I was there like 14 years total. Like I felt like I knew all the things that were happening and the important work being done in the city. And then I got to ARTSmemphis and learned about all these organizations and all these arts organizations, all the amazing things that they're doing, all the incredible work that they're doing, and especially like youth serving organizations doing really, really great stuff. And I mean, it just kind of blew my mind. Like it was, kind of coming out of the Civil Rights Museum and doing that work, it was kind of hard to see how any other job could be as gratifying, but ARTSmemphis has been equally, if not more gratifying, just because, and I was telling this story earlier today, a couple of weeks ago, Anna asked me, are you excited to go to work in the mornings? And I'm like, actually, yeah, like I'm excited to go to work. Like my job is to make Memphis better by supporting artists and arts organizations. Like that's my job. That's a freaking awesome job, like yeah. I love it. It's great.
No, I'm with you. I mean, as somebody who also loves to go to work, I mean, I'm also I also really love that. I mean, I think part of the tricky thing, of course, is that, here we are, we're in this room and we're having this conversation and this is your job. And of course, part of your job is to be a cheerleader, and to be like, yes, this is rocking and this is happening and these are the kind of things that are really good, and of course we want that, and that's a totally legitimate thing to have as a part of our conversation. But I'm also wondering, like, as somebody who is excited about the stuff that we're doing, what are some things that you feel like, how do we make it better? How do we do this even better? I mean, aside from finding a suitcase full of gold at the end of the rainbow, how do we? What are some things that? And I know it's not one of those things where Tracy is like suddenly going to say, "Well, Hamlet, we've got to fix the schools" or whatever.
Right.
I know it's a crazy, complicated, multi-level, layered set of cogs. But I'm curious, like, as somebody who's been doing this for so long, in such a passionate way, I'm curious, like, if you could make some changes in the world, what might they be, or what are some things that we could work towards?
Well, luckily, like right before this, I was in a planning meeting where we were talking about about this kind of thing.
It was you and the Memphis Illuminati just hanging out, like talking about how to fix the city. Let's do this.
How do we do this, right? Yeah. But I think, so I think the biggest thing holding us back is our poverty, and I don't know how to fix that. But what I do know is that the arts and so many arts organizations can be a really big part of the solution. Like there's so many organizations, working in specific neighborhoods, working with specific schools or, with certain groups of people or kids or whatever. And all of that is like doing really amazing things to, support youth in their lives, in their education, in their expression, in their family lives, like and then just also I'm thinking about like creative aging, supporting seniors. They're like serving hundreds of thousands of seniors every day. I mean, there's just amazing things happening every day all over Memphis through the arts that are really making very real positive impacts in people's lives. So I know it's part of the solution.
Well, I mean, thinking about that, I mean, so we've got this element one of the elements is, of course, serving the underserved more. And then, of course, there's all of the things that we have to do in order to make the other things that make that possible. Mm-hmm. So we're thinking about that. And then also part of it would be then to share that good news, for a lack of a better euphemism, mm-hmm. but to share that good news and to talk about the importance of those things. Mm-hmm. That is maybe another component of it. Mm-hmm. And then obviously funding, of course, is another part of it. But I'm wondering, one thing for me that I sort of think about is like, how do we, as people who really love this stuff, how do we get other people to love it as much? Mm-hmm. You know, and like one of the questions that every once in a while I would ask my gallery management class, it would be like, hey, how do we make America as crazy about art as Italy is? I mean, aside from that, like, 3,000 year head start that they had, but like, what do you think? Yeah. Like, is there a thing in your head that is a way towards that?
Yeah, I think to your point, the storytelling, like, I think one thing is just to let people know, just like try it out, there's no, like, you don't have to know X, Y, or Z. You don't have to be A, B, or C, like, just go check something out. Like, go to the art gallery, or go, try a class, go see the dance performance, go check out that play, like, just check it out, see what you like, and if you like it, go do more of it, and then try something else new. So I think part of it is that there's no, and I think there's like no right or wrong. Like, you can just go and do it.
Right. Okay. So I like this too. So now we're thinking about, again, maybe going back to education, because that's sort of a point of commonality, or can be a point of commonality, where most people in this particular society will go through some kind of educational component. And so then maybe making those earlier experiences with art in its many forms, to be able to make it more approachable, more possible. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that sounds good. And then what are some other things that you're thinking about in terms of your three-dimensional chess board that is, how do we make art better, or make the city more
well, I think we're starting to get there, but I think just, recognizing, the reason people around the world know Memphis is because of our art. Like, our art drives our identity as a city, I feel like. So let's honor it and respect it and support it in all the forms that it comes in. It's not just this or just that. Like, there's loads of it for every type of art and every type of taste. Like, so let's respect all of that, and I can't remember what the other part of the question was.
No, that was good. But now thinking about that, so then if we were to step forward, so then would that be also a matter of thinking about the people who are in charge of the city, its politicians, its movers, to get them to also think about the importance of that?
For sure. And I think, so I think our, new Mayor Young, art and culture was a part of, his plan coming in, and it is, and we have a new, Office of Culture and Creative Economy, which is great. And I think, really just helping to ensure that, not just this class of elected officials at the city or county level, but, after everyone that follows, have an awareness and appreciation for the significant role that the arts play, not just in our culture, but again, as part of the solution for the challenges that we have before us, and acknowledging that it's, I think, just integral to our identity. It's a significant part of our economy, and really is nothing bad to come from investing in the arts. Like there's only good things that can come from this. And so I think the more that we put into that, it will only help us, and the returns can only be exponentially greater than what we put into that. Because I think the just the significance of having an interesting art exhibition to go to, like the Powerhouse. I mean, those were interesting and cool and unique and different, and then what is that today? Like, can we go to? And I'm starting to ramble now, but I think it's like there's just so many amazing things. Like, we have such great art in this town. All of it,
Well, I mean, one of the things that I love that you just said, and just to kind of go back and maybe underline it or highlight it, I love that. I do not love how I was thinking of it very selfishly. I was thinking about it like, how do we get more people into art? Like how do I get more people on my team? How do I get more people to like this thing that I love so much? But I love how you reframed it and were rethinking about it, not necessarily as an art-centric thing, but also how art can be a kind of generator for improvement in all things, not just thinking about art how I was selfishly thinking about it, but I love how you were thinking about it as a possible solution to other things that really are great and worthy of our attention. To me, that seems really powerful. I mean, for sure, that's something that I'm going to think about as I meditate today. But yeah, okay. Maybe not a great way to end, but that feels really good.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, does that feel all right to you?
It does. I mean, yeah, I think, and again, I just like spent my whole afternoon kind of just talking about this and thinking about this, but like how do we, those of us in like jobs like I have, like how do we help artists and the, organizations working to present art, how do we help them to do more and to really get the resources that they need to do the great work that's already happening, and for artists to and kids growing up in the city, how to those that have that compulsion to create, how can we help them find their place and their way to make their way as artists and to grow as artists. And so how can we enable that, support it, grow it, and again, just use all of those creative tools that we have to make Memphis an even better city.
Oh, that's a good place to end.
Ooh, yeah.
Let's stop there. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Hamlet.
And that was the first of 2 interviews that I recorded with Tracy Lauritzen Wright. The interview that you just listened to was recorded on January 9th, 2025. Please join us next week when we will have the second of 2 interviews with Tracy Lauritzen Wright. Until then, thank you for listening.